I often think it's our ability, when things get hard or our ability in any day, the power of a smile alone, if we force ourselves to smile, it's impossible to think a bad thought, right? And so when we come back to believing in the good in people and those moments of good vibes, how do we just keep our levity and our sense of humor in all that's coming at us today?
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutvik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I had the opportunity to sit down and chat with Kris Hackbarth-Horn. Kris is an experienced HR and organizational development senior leader. Her passion is helping organizations steward their intentional cultures and engage their team members to achieve their personal and professional goals. She has worked with nonprofit organizations, financial institutions, retail, and manufacturing, to name a few. Today, she is the Chief People Officer at Fox Communities Credit Union and pours her heart into the organization and its people. I can't wait for you to hear how she does this and the impact that she's had. All right, Kris, well, thanks for being here. I'm excited. We've talked once. I felt like we could talk for hours. And so I just am grateful for you and you being here to share kind of your story, experience, journey to creating vibes in the workplace. And before we jump into that, I would like to ground the conversation in your definition of what a vibe is.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kristi. It's an honor to be here today. So, when I think about this definition of vibe, I was actually thinking about that again this morning and preparing for this. And I thought, what does that really mean to me? And here's here's sort of what I came up with. I think sometimes it's that feeling, it's the energy in the room that you get from this group of people that you're connecting with, doing work with. How does it feel, when you walk in that room? How does it feel when you leave that room? I also think it's the feeling of, when we're driving to work or when we're just walking to work today, which could only be 10 feet for some people. But, how does how does it feel? Like when you step into that, are you excited about that? Are you pulling back from that? Just how does that connect? And, when we sign on, am I excited to jump into that? Am I not so excited about that? But at the end of the day, I think it's this chance to really feel that what I did today, did it make a difference? Did it connect to my purpose? Did it connect to my passion? Did I find laughter along the way? All those things to me sort of give that feeling of vibe to me.
Yeah. And it's so hard to define that always, right? Or like to say, oh, we do this energy thing well, or we do this vibe thing well. So that's what, we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about. Cause I agree with you. Like how you feel about something in your gut is like the vibe that you get and the energy that's there. Or like, oh, when you see an email come through from somebody or a phone call come through, like, do you want to answer it? Do you not
Do you
want
go like, oh, do you pause? To breathe?
Exactly. Or like, oh,
Right.
how am I going to have to respond to this one? Right. But I think it's so interesting to me, which is why I love, talking to people on this podcast of like the story of how they got to where they're at today to create those vibes in the workplace and like the micro moments that matter and how you've played out those micro moments or how other leaders that you've interacted with have played out those micro moments to create a good or bad vibe, right? Or maybe a really ugly one. So I'd like to start with you just telling us a little bit about your journey with a focus on like the energy and the situations that you were in and why it was good or bad and what that meant to you.
All right. Well, I'll do my best to keep it brief, but keep it, reflective of today's discussion. So, my journey starts like this, and I've been in the people business, as I'll say now, for about 35 years. So I call myself now relatively seasoned. Uh, for where I've been along the way. But when I look back, it sort of started, I think one of those first pivotal moments for me was when I was in my young 20s. And at that moment in time, when I went away to school, even being 18 when I went to college, I really didn't have a focus. I didn't really have a purpose. My parents would just sort of say, I went to college to graduate in fun. And, and I surely had some fun, but I didn't really realize my focus, and I did okay, but I did not do exceptional. And it was probably about my third year in that my parents sat me down and sort of say, "Okay, listen, we love you, but it is clear like you are going nowhere fast. You changed you changed your major in that grade. You just got a marital relations. That's not going to bode well for your future. So what are you doing with your life? Like get it together." And it just so happened my mother worked for a local temp service, and she got me a job answering a phone all summer long in this big new corporate office downtown Menasha, Wisconsin. And all summer long, I did the "thanks for calling, to whom I transfer your call." And what I realized sitting in that lobby is that all these people were going up this elevator. And I thought, hmm, what do you got to do to get up the elevator? Because I was never allowed up the elevator. And interesting enough, it landed me a new opportunity that started me back then in this thing called personnel. And it gave me this idea like, hey, maybe there's something more, something out there that I can search for or I could do that might allow me to use my talents in different ways and to find a path to feeling successful and feeling that purpose. And I was able to land a wonderful job, worked for an organization that helped me finish and paid for my education. And it started me on this personnel journey back then as well. And it was one of those first moments that pulled through, I think, for me, and understanding, how important that is when we have a direction, when we feel fulfilled, when we begin to say, I can grow, I can do that, I can believe in myself, how powerful that is to start us all on the right path.
What were some of those things, or like the infrastructure or programs or like leaders that you worked with in that first role that really helped you understand that really helped you see that there could be more, that you could fulfill your purpose in the workplace?
Yeah, I had some really wonderful mentors along the way, and I'm so thankful for that. People who would sit down and say, "Kris, when you do that, that's amazing. And when you do that, we just shouldn't do that." Like that that's just
That's
that's
almost
just
just
not
as important, right?
it is. I mean, I remember earlier in my career, in that role, I was to help support what even back then, so I'm using old language on purpose, what was the Christmas party versus now today what's called our holiday party. And this wonderful group of women in this manufacturing environment and had been the sponsors of that forever. And I went in, trying to be assertive, being highly engaging, a little challenging, maybe a little too blunt. And probably within 10 minutes, I had destroyed every beautiful tradition these women had created. I thought it was super effective. I went out, and 30 minutes later, they were in, the personnel manager's office crying about how I had destroyed their world. And I look back at that now and I think, wow, what a lesson. Like small things, right? But really pivotal in that moment in time to be like, yeah, you got to listen. You got to honor the past. Part of what my mantra is today in any opportunity is how do you honor the past? Because you would have never gotten to where we are today if it wasn't for those who came before and the decisions they made before. So it's a really small piece, but so that role was really, I think, really pivotal. But it led me into, another manufacturing environment in which, in my, mid to late 20s, I was a safety director in an environment that was full of 98% males or more, and that taught me a lot about optimistic resilience. About the importance of building unity in relationship, because both of those environments were union environments when I started out.
Yeah. So, okay, there's two things here. So, let's talk about your mentors, right? You said you had some really great mentors early on. Were these formal, informal? Like, did the organizations that you worked for have these programs where you were tagged to somebody, or did you seek that out yourself and just connect yourself with the people that you felt could really, lift you up?
Yeah, I think earlier in my career, my mentors came more in my formal structure in an organization. So those were really the people that I reported to, or were a fellow leader in the organization that I worked for. I think as I became more seasoned on my journey, I really tried to seek out other people outside of my industry, or maybe even different board members for the organization of the boards that were part when I worked for Goodwill, and I would seek out our, other board members that were on our nonprofit boards to help. And other mentors came to me through my opportunity to volunteer and give back. And so again, other people that were on the boards, maybe even in some cases, the CEOs that I was helping support as we'd sit down and have coffee and connect along the way.
So, what was it about having a mentor that you felt created the vibe or the energy, or helped you create the vibe and the energy for others, right? Because sometimes you were in these leadership roles. So, having a mentor was something that you got, then that created the energy for those that you led, right? What was it and why?
I think for me, it was about the chance, to be able to say, I don't have all the answers. And we all need at times fresh eyes and fresh perspective. And so when I think about some of the coaching that maybe people will ask me or lean in today to help with, I think it really helps me to be in a place to say, well, hey, here's a little bit of my journey. And here's when I worked, when I had somebody who told me this, I couldn't have gotten to where I did if it wasn't for a couple people saying, "Ooh, you need to probably think about that a little differently, maybe." Or if we do that, what could be the risk with that? What could be the win? What could be the risk? And I think those things, having somebody that just sort of has your back, that's just really invested in it because of you, has, that you trust and they trust you, so you can have that really great candor that really helps build you, is critically important and important in those spots for sure.
I think you bring up a good point of trust, right? Because in this dynamic work environment that we're in these days, where it's hybrid, it's remote, it's in person, it's a lot of things, it might be perceived to be harder to build that trust. Because I think pre-pandemic, many of us were used to, not all, because there was remote work then too, but I think it wasn't as prominent as it is now, or hybrid, or just the way work works has changed. So, how do you build that trust in order to create that kind of authentic connection?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. Right now on my journey with my, Fox family, Fox Communities, credit union family, we have been working right to the point of the very foundation, is that aspect of trust. And how do we continue to build that, as we move forward? So, I think it's a lot of things when we talk about that. We talk a lot about in when I'm talking with our leaders about this ability to be vulnerable and humble. Those are ultimately, the characteristics. Again, I don't have all the answers, or, oh my gosh, I just really messed that up. That was not my intention. And I'm willing to go back and say that. And I'm also equally, we work really hard with our leaders to continue to communicate with our team about, be really clear about what the expectation was when you're talking with people. And then what did you observe? Because often when we talk about trust, we can let our own bias, our own thought, our own things precede what we perceive in somebody, versus just simply being able to stop and pull back. And then those moments just say, okay, we had an opportunity here. What did we expect? And let me be clear about what I thought that was. So we're first on the same page. And then equally, this is what I thought was going to happen. But now you tell me what really went on. And when we work through that type of communication model with people, we don't let our own perception and assumptions get us there. We slow down to really effectively listen to what it is, and at the same time hold somebody accountable to say, hey, this is what we said. Now it didn't seem like that quite worked out that way. Tell me why. And I think when we're able to have that vulnerability, humility, and we're able to combine that with our ability to actively listen and not being afraid to engage into the discussion, those are the things that bring us to deeper connection, deeper understanding, of each sides of the coin there, and I think make us a little stronger. And so that's what we've been working on these days.
I would be so curious if you're willing to tell us a story about a particular situation where maybe there was somebody who was not as willing to be vulnerable or lacked trust for whatever reason, and how you were able to, whether it be you or a group of people or, an outside influence, were able to kind of turn this person around and reposition them to garner the trust that they needed and to be more vulnerable with their team in order to do the things that you are actively doing within your organization.
Yeah. So actually, let me tell you two stories, if that's okay. I'm going to share one where it was, I think, really important to call the behavior, that call it as it was, and then let somebody make a choice. And then I'll come back and we'll share another one about a process that I've really seen people sort of lift from, that has really helped them in that space because they were exhibiting behavior that really, was really sort of command and control, and people didn't trust them, and it was just ugh. So the first one is this: I worked with a leader along the way. He was very good at achieving results, like just really good, sort of really good, known in the industry that we were in. But here's what would happen. He would, and unfortunately, I really believe this was intentional. He would, in moments of when working with people that weren't quite at the same level he was in the organization, he would make them feel like, they did it wrong. It wasn't his way. He was a little superior, all of that. And it was destructive to the team. I mean, they felt they couldn't come into work and be fully who they were. They get an email and they would cringe, or they get a phone call, because back then we had more phones than we did IMs today, right? And and they'd see his name come across their phone, and they would literally, react. And so I had a chance to go out to an executive leadership conference, and one of the keynote speakers, and a part of that week I was there, was a gentleman called Robert Sutton. And Robert wrote the book on the no asshole rule. I'll just say the title as he calls it. And so I spent this whole week after coming off a discussion with this leader before I left. And on the way on home on the plane, I highlighted and tabbed several areas in the book. And I met with him on Monday, and I just said, we have been trying so hard to have you realize the impact of you not leaning in to, caring for your team, trusting your team, building your team, and the impact you're having on people outside of even your direct team. I don't know how else to get this through to you. And I want to be open and honest with you to give you a chance to succeed. And so I went to this conference, and I said, now I know you're going to be really appalled with me. I said, but I don't know how else to do it, because I've given you everything I got and it's not working. So I said, so I'm going to turn the cover of this book over and you may not really like it. And I also chose to, so I'm crystal clear, that I've highlighted and tabbed a couple sections in the book that give you examples of how I think your behavior is impacting our team, and quite frankly, how it's impacting our financial success or the mission success of what we're trying to do. And I said, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the book, give it some time over the next week or two, and then come back, and let's sit down with your leader and let's talk about, are you ready to go on a journey to make the changes that you need to make, that we're asking you to make? Because if it's not you, I'm not going to force you into a place to try to, make you change, because you're not going to want to change. Only you can change your behavior. If you want to go on the journey, we're with you. And if you don't want to go on the journey, well, we'll honor what you've done and we'll work a transition, but let's just call it, because it's not good for you.
And what was your role in relation to his at this point in time, at this juncture? Because that's really hard to get feedback like that.
Yeah. So I was leading our people efforts in the organization at that point in time. So that was really sort of my role. And the result of that story was, 2 weeks later, he came back and he said, you know what, I'm just not going to change. That's not what I want to do. And he left the organization, went on to another organization, I think, and did well in that culture. But it wasn't for our culture. And the good thing about that, and the hard thing as well, a couple of things were funny. So I went to his office and see if the book was there. So he either took it or burned it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen. but It wasn't in his office anyway. But
Like
the other
turned
thing
it
is,
page by page.
I'm
Oh,
not sure.
Kris.
Well,
Ah.
and I saw him after that, and we had really good discussion. So, all ended well in that journey because my intention was care, right? My intention is I care about you, and I want you to know that this behavior is pulling the team back, is destroying this fundamental of trust, and nobody can do their best if they don't feel that exists. And so since then we've had some, I've seen him and we've had some good chuckles and discussions. So I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? Because that's a great example of like, you're not going to win everybody over either. And you're not going to convince every single person that it's worth their time or effort to create this good energy and these good vibes within an organization because some people just aren't willing. And that's okay. But I like how you were bold enough to have that conversation, be authentically you, share some feedback with him so that he at the very least had the opportunity to make a decision for himself and not just dance around him.
Right, because at the end of the day, sometimes, organizations put in these, systems that it's top down, you must change, you must do different, this isn't working. And what we have to be able to say is, here's our expectation based upon, our values, or as we call it, sort of the Fox way that we live by. And so our expectation is you lead and you live within that set. Not that you can't be authentically you, because there's plenty of room in there to be authentically you, but we don't accept this. And so you got to choose, can you live in that? Because we don't accept jerkism, or we don't accept these things, right? Because that's not going to bring the best out of what we're trying to do, or in my prior organizations, to care for our customers, or now, as we say, our members. So I think that's really important. And so being in a place to have your leaders and others accept that what we permit, we promote, and how do we really help step into that space. But so that would be one story. I think the other story I would tell you is we've worked, along the same way with leaders over the time to really slow down. And if things aren't working, again, how do you give that clarity? How do you let them understand? And so, we have a process in which, if people are struggling or something's not working well, that we really step back and we ask them, to self reflect. Self reflection is like a powerful thing. And too often people don't want to do it because sometimes they're afraid of what they might see, or what they might get. And on the other end, we're just not trained to stop and do that. We're too busy moving and responding and reacting, and, everything that goes on in our busy days. And so we purposely have, and I have for quite a while throughout my career, had a process of self reflection, which continues to let, people sit back and say, here's the areas that maybe I've got some natural strengths and opportunity. And here's some opportunities that maybe I struggle with, that I have to apply learned behavior in order to get the leadership outcome that I want. And so what do I need to do in order to achieve that leadership legacy, that outcome of my leadership? What do I need to do to recognize those strengths? Can I use those strengths to help overcome one of these struggles on the other side? But what learned behavior knowledge, or in my own values of my own leadership, do I have to lean into situationally to give a different outcome? So we've had a chance, to work many leaders through that process. And, when they embrace it themselves, you literally see just the lights go on and the journey of change that comes. And you start hearing feedback from other leaders. I don't know what happened, with so and so, but wow, that was a whole different approach that I saw on that day. Or, they're usually trying to control things. And today, they really sort of threw it on the table to the team and said, "Hey, if this isn't working, we'll do something else." And that ability in those moments to, trust, it gives off, like we said, a whole different vibe of how people feel.
How do you give them? Because I hear you when you say, like, we're so busy, right? And I hear that often. And I've actually tried to remove that from my vocabulary this year because I found myself saying it so much that I think I was living up to my own expectations of being busy,
Yeah.
right? And then I would find myself not busy thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do with myself right now? What I need to be busy, right? That's like who I am. I'm busy. I'm a busy person. So how do you allow your leaders the time and space to sit back and self-reflect? And how is there a process by which you go through, like, to remove stuff off their plate, to help them, like, systematically, operationally, how does that work? Because we live in this busy.
Yeah, it is really hard, isn't it? I mean, I always say, if we don't control our calendar, everybody else does, and I think, that is literally so true. And it's different for everybody. I learned a long time ago that, it's never about this idea of even work-life balance. It's about a concept of being, how do you be life friendly? Used to be a leader I worked with, and, occasionally I'd be in on a Saturday and I'd see him and I'd say, Dick, why are you in here? Like, get out and enjoy the world. And he'd say to me, Kris, you have to understand, I love what I do. And if I can come in and do it on these days, that works for me. It's not what'll work for somebody else, but I, respect my journey and I'm okay with it and respect that. Right. And it was a really big lesson on this idea of how do you create, this opportunity to be life friendly. But I think when it comes to this busyness, I think you're right. Words matter, So even when I say that, like words matter, that's really insightful for me today too. But I think, you do have to operational it. So we work, and I talk with leaders a lot about, do you have personal work time on your calendar? Do you block it and hold to it? Just to be able to say, hey, I have to be able to step away from just the tasks or the do, or in your essence to lead, it's okay to tell your team once in a while, I'm closing the door. The door's not always open, because if I don't do my best sometimes to step away and work on this, or step back to be thinking about, standing on the balcony to see what's happening, nobody does. And so, the door's going to be closed for a while. Now, if there's an emergency, it's like, okay, knock, knock. But we're usually not doing open heart surgery, so we're okay, and
Totally.
yeah. Or as I used to tell to my accounting friends, there's probably not an immediate accounting emergency that we can't methodically handle. So we'll be okay. But sometimes our ability to just demonstrate that, like, hey, I need time because I become better when I focus on me, or I focus on a strategy, or I focus on these things. It gives me time to get better. And when I get stronger as a leader, I help my team rise and get stronger. And I think we've got to demonstrate that it's okay to walk away, or it's okay to be able to say, at the end of the day or during the day, hey, my daughter has a choir concert at school and I'm stepping out because that's important to me. And when we do that as leaders, we give this grace and opening for others to understand they can accept and live much more of a holistic, well-rounded life.
How do you I agree with that, because the shadow of a leader is strong, right? So people have a natural tendency to, like, fall in the footsteps of how they're being led. And it's so interesting to see people maybe you've known in the past who then go work under a different leader. And you're like, what happened to you? Why are you acting in that manner? Why are you doing that? So that leadership capability has become, in my opinion, just almost like the single-handed most important thing in setting the tone and setting the vibe. And then, of course, there's experiences along the way in, systems and operations and how they get information and how they operate, how people operate in an organization that, either support or move away from that vibe it's trying to be created. Another thing I want to understand too is, like, how are you, because your organization is a larger organization. I can't remember how many people work in the organization currently.
We have about 470 team members that are part of our Fox family.
Okay, so that's a good amount, right? So how are you highlighting some of these great things that you guys are doing to the organization so people can see you're not just like a mouthpiece or some values on the wall? Like, what does that look like so people really believe that you're walking the walk and talking the talk?
A couple things. I think we talk a lot about the power of intentionality of culture. Every organization has a culture, a makeup of decisions, people that are there, the market, market segment, all that stuff. We all get it. Where we live, everybody has a culture. But we believe that we have an intentional culture. And so we do that by keeping three things sort of in our formula front and center. One is the power of our purpose, mission, vision, and values, which we really went back now 2.5 years ago and actually did different than some organizations will go about that work, and created a grassroots, concept up of asking our team members, like, hey, what do you, in one word, describe our culture, and what do you think our mission, purpose, and all that stuff is? So we really got the benefit of people on that journey now 2.5, almost 3 years ago, be feeling they were part of that. Like, I created that. We had 20,000 words that got submitted. We call ourselves the Fox family because when out of all the words that somebody could pick today, the one that came up by the majority winner out of any word in that first question was family. And so we call it our Fox family because my fellow team members said that's what it was. And so that gave us, I will say, like a leg up for like, hey, we're all in this together and this is what it means and this is how we do that. We also look greatly at symbols to really make it real because, you can hang it on the wall, but what really matters is, what happens after that, and how do you live that? And so, words matter. Like we don't use the word employee. Look at the definition and say who wants to be somebody that just gets wages and salary and is at a non-exempt level. Well, I'm inspired to be one of those. Wouldn't you? No, I mean, no one's inspired to do that. But, if you say team member, you talk about this connection of, feeling a sense of belonging in a group that's there to achieve a common goal. I mean, it just reaches to a different point. And so, words greatly matter. And those words have to be respoken by your leaders. And so our strategic, communication, our internal communication process, the way we cascade communication, the way we onboard, the way we breathe our talent brand, all of those things have to constantly keep those words front and center, how we recognize, how we appreciate, all those things. And then, of course, we wrap all of our people programs strategically around that value set, around those given behaviors that when we all lean in together, how do we rise? And we keep challenging time and time again all of our people programs to say, is it doing what we all promised we would do together? Is the behavior, because behavior always precedes result, is the behavior that we're creating through these programs allowing you to bring the best out of you, which in turn allows us to do the best for our members.
And how do you measure that? So I get this question a lot, right? Like I'm in the HR world too, HR consulting, and it's like it all sounds great. And then you have a business leader inevitably that says, awesome. But how do I know that's actually working?
Well, I think there's a couple things. And, I always look at like lead and leg measures, right? So our leg measures in this case is, are we meeting the strategic plan? Are we growing the way we want? Are we getting feedback from our members that are telling us that, we're doing the right things for them? I mean, those to me are all the leg measures in this camp. The lead measures for me are, what are they saying on your engagement survey? Like, are they inspired? Are they not inspired? We've been able to, in the last year and last 4 years, move our team members that were like 36% engaged to 64% actively engaged with our Gallup survey, and move our disengaged down to 3%, which I just think those people were out on leave and not feeling well that day. I'm not quite sure. So, those are important measures. One of our values that we say is be the reason. And it's all about this concept of how do I personally invest in myself to grow so that I can, move on my career path, or I can do something that really makes a difference for our members or our community. And so, 4 years ago, we probably had about like 3 people take advantage of a very little bit of tuition reimbursement. Last year, we had 34 or 38 people already. We have 24 this year that are actively pursuing something. Our Glassdoor reviews, our Indeed reviews that people just do on their own, and say how you doing. Those things really matter. How many people have growth and development plans for us, actively participating in their own journey of growth, either something that's personal outside of work or inside of work. Those things really matter. I also always watch for language. So if you take it off the wall, the question is, do people speak it? And so, we have a variety of recognition programs. One is Props to You, which represents the acronym of our values. So one of our on our internet site, everyday fellow team members are just recognizing each other. And I watch that do they use the language of our values in this props to you? And it's amazing how you continue to see, if you pay attention, where we were with language and where we are now when our leaders speak it. That's all real to me as we move forward through that.
So how do you get other leaders to understand that? Or maybe people who weren't part of like creating these words, right? And you bring them into the organization from outside. Like, how do you ensure that they are going to, wrap their head and their heart and their hands around these things that have really created the vibe within your organization?
I think it starts by making sure, and we are currently even looking again at all of our selection processes, all of our, talent brand language, all the way through, how we onboard people, which in my opinion sometimes is, a full year, a whole lap around the sun, depending upon your role before you're into it. But we really try, you can train skill, but you can't always bring in people that align. And so you really have to sit down and, during that interview process and make sure that you're validating time and time again. And you're asking questions, you're reaching out, you're looking at examples that they've done in the past. My prior lives, we've done programs in which we brought all candidates in for at least our professional leadership jobs into a whole day simulated experience and really pushed them through doing some assessment tools, from doing some team activities. We do the one like, you're the coach of the high school team and your 3 players went out the night before the state championship and violated, one of the rules. Do you play them? Do you not play them? Right. But what I was looking for is, well, of course, I was interested to know ethically what they responded. But what I was really observing in that is, who were the people that saw somebody else in that circle not contributing, and they'd say, "Oh, Kris, you haven't shared anything for a while. What are you thinking?" Because that was really important to our culture, that we actively listen, that we create a sense of holding people up or pulling people in. And so we did those things. And we had this fun little puzzle game where, if you were going to work on one of our retail floors, you were constantly interrupted with tons of stuff as a leader on that store. And so we put them about assignment to put as many pieces together for this puzzle working in this group before. And then, we were like, we're going to count how many pieces you get into the puzzle. And then 3 minutes in, we make them shift to the right. So now they had to take on somebody else's pieces. And and then halfway through, we'd pull them out and ask them a question. And so then they lose precious time, and the question was, how do you respond to that? Do you laugh it off? Do you have fun with that? Do you get really upset about that because your competitive nature is outdoing, just your own emotional intelligence? And so I think, it's really important in environments like that we really test for that. If you say your language is important and you don't use the employee word and you make a purposeful attempt up front to say that, does the candidate even try to get on board with the word team member? That tells you something right there.
Okay, so I'm really, really curious, going back to this, the people programs and kind of wrapped around the values and pulling up your engagement from 36% to 63%. I think those are the numbers that you said.
Yeah, you're close.
I mean, it's a 30%, right?
Yeah.
Increase. That's a big deal. Any engagement process I've been a part of, they look for 5% here or swinging the needle slightly. So is there something you feel like you can hang your hat on single-handedly, or a couple things single-handedly that really, really influenced your people to get more involved in, engaged with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. The actual numbers, I just looked them up, so we're both on the same page. We moved it from 29% actually to 64.
Oh,
So
even better.
it's even better than I was telling you before. So, but here's what I would say that I think for us, I think anything's a part of timing. And so before I talked about respecting the past, like how do you honor the past? And so, part of my mantra, whether I take on a new volunteer opportunity or whether I step into a new organization, which I've been really blessed to work for the companies I've worked for many years along the way, but has always been, how do you honor the past, live in the moment while you build for the future? And so I think it's really important. So when I had a chance to join my Fox family, and our CEO was also just in his role for a year. So we got really blessed with some things called timing. And you got to remember, at that point, we were going through, I think within 2 months of, our CEO taking on his role, COVID hit us. And, about 6 months before on our journey, we had just put in a new operating system, and we had really moved from, what had been like, very basic, simple system we had for 20 years to like the elite Mercedes of the system, because, of the industry, because we needed data and we needed to grow and we needed ability to go digital, and we needed. And that was a really hard change process. So and it's part of the pivotal reason why we approach resetting that purpose, mission, vision, and values. On the vision work was, of course, all of our CEOs work, but the other three from a grassroots up, because we needed a symbol. We needed something at that time to say to our people, something's going to change, right? And it starts with you. It starts with hearing your voice, like what's important to you, what matters. And we were able to honor the foundation of our past and yet now move that in a collective group to the future. And then we did some really significant symbolic things. We went from tuition reimbursement that was $300, and in one rollout, we said it's now $5,250. Go where you want to go. Here's our strategic relationships with college. How can we help you grow? We rolled out caregiver leave. We didn't have any of that on the plate. So if you somebody that you that lives with you is sick and they need you, or your parents, or you're a grandparent and you've got responsibility, or your daycare runs into trouble and you don't have anyone to watch your kids, you don't have to use your PTO. We got your back. Those things. We changed bereavement leave not to be based upon how many days you get based upon a legal definition, but who do you love? And if you lose somebody loved, let us know what we can do to help you and support you. And so, we changed, got rid of all of our old performance reviews, and we said, you're not a number. It's about understanding what your meaning and what your purpose is. You have to own it, but what can we do to help you? And so those symbolic changes, like really ingraining those changes, got people to say, oh, something different happened around this place. And I can be a part of that. And I think that was an amazing springboard for us to help us where we are today and where we're going to move forward.
And I remember when we first spoke, you talked to me about your performance review process and how you changed that. And I think you mentioned you ask 3 very simple questions. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
Are you willing to share what those questions are? Because I remember thinking like, wow, that's really cool and really simple and really profound.
So it's actually a two-step sort of what I'll call philosophy model. So let me explain that first, and then I'll get to the questions. So the first thing we had to do is move away from the old, disciplinary action stuff too, right? That was, verbal warning, whatever. I never even got that. And eventually we just suspend you. I mean, let's just take money away from you, or whatever. So I've never really believed in those processes, because I really think it's a moment about understanding that, if you can set the expectation, the observation, how do we continue to have meaningful discussions in a cadence of one-to-ones, connections? And so we move to what we call a daily performance accountability model. So when you do that, you do not have to be in this aspect that, once a year, I'm going to give you a number and tell you how you're doing, because we're working with our leaders and to create ongoing feedback throughout our day, throughout our journey. I mean, not literally every moment. I'm saying, hey, that was good, but you get it conceptually what we're doing, right? And so you have to create that first. So that was the first step. And then the second step was say, okay, if we got that going on and that's working for us and everything that makes up that system, now we can do a whole different discussion. Now I can step back and I can say, what gives you meaning and purpose? Like, under our growth and development strategy, what ultimately would people say about you that would make you the most proud? What would that be? What does that look like? And how you answered those 2 questions, how does it relate to what you're doing today? And then what's one simple goal, SMART goal, we do use SMART goals, but what's one simple goal that you can do in the next 3 to 6 months that gets you closer to what that is? It could be something, again, personal, because we don't ask people to check themselves at the door We want people to holistically come into for who they are. And so it can be a personal goal. It can be a goal that really allows me to love what I'm doing, but do it better or focus in an area. Or it could be a leap goal that gets me to something I want to do way out here, but I'm going to do this right now to get me a step closer. And we hold a cadence of rotation on that. So one quarter, it's our leaders working directly with our team members and checking in on those plans. The next quarter, we switch it to all of our leaders to do that. And we just keep rotating through that experience. It's simple, but hugely impactful.
Yeah. And have you found that people are pretty open to having those discussions, or was it a little bit of a like, ooh, that's a little personal when you first started rolling it out?
Well, you got to remember, my organization is a credit union and, we're all about people and helping communities. And so by nature, we really lean in, to being a people centric organization. But I would tell you that it does vary. And, we started out the discussion about this idea of trust. And so teaching our leaders to establish an environment of trust is really important in that to get at authentic discussions. But the other thing that's really important is we've got to make sure our leaders realize that they're not counselors. They're not, that's not where they are. So we need to continue to wrap resources around them, like many organizations today, that people are just, life is full of a lot of life. And don't we see that happening within our workforce today at a rate that I've never seen over the last 35 years? And so we're also, working hard in those camps to think about what we can do to help in those spaces.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. Okay, gosh, I've been taking notes over here because there's been so many good nuggets of information that I don't want to forget. But if you could, give one piece of advice to a leader listening that's simple, really, really simple, what would that piece of advice be? Or what would that next thing be to just get started in moving the needle on creating better vibes within their organization or for their leadership or for them personally?
One of the things that at least for me that's important in my center of energy and my vibe is the power of laughter and humor in our lives today. And so, we used to say, people that eat together stay together, and then COVID happened and we couldn't eat with anybody. And so that changed our whole world, right? But I often think it's our ability, when things get hard, or our ability in any day, the power of a smile alone. If we force ourselves to smile, it's impossible to think a bad thought, right? And so when we come back to believing in the good in people and those moments of good vibes, how do we just keep our levity and her sense of humor in all that's coming at us today? Because if we do that, all that intensity, all of that stress, all of that, we get into a different place in just our own headspace, and deep breaths and some levity in how we work together. I tell you, it makes a whole difference to how people are just feeling in that way. We have a value called plan for fun, and it's just literally about that purpose, right? Because we recognize we need this ability to laugh and to smile and just to make the world a little brighter for all of us.
Yeah, I even use that with my kids. So my oldest plays volleyball, and when she's on the volleyball court during a game, I can see her intensity, especially if it's like a really close match or whatever. And so I'll like get her attention, and I'll just like
Force a smile. Yeah,
she
smile.
kind of rolls her eyes, but I'm like, just like let's keep some perspective here on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and have some fun. Because gosh, without the fun, what's life all about?
And when we laugh, if we allow ourselves to get so intense, everything sort of shuts down in that intensity. And if we can just learn to take those deep breaths and find the moment for laughter along the way, and to laugh at ourselves, which ultimately gets us to this thing of humility and vulnerability, it just makes it all a little bit better.
Because we're all still learning. That's the reality. No matter how brilliant you are, we're all still learning.
So true.
Well, I thank you so much for just spending the time and sharing your stories and your insight and the wonderful things you guys are doing at the credit union and your leadership in that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. What a great way to spend a snowy Friday in Wisconsin.
Wow, my conversation with Kris was filled with one-liners that were so profound. One of the things that stuck out to me was her emphasis on how much words matter. Words are symbols of what the organization stands for, and they have to be spoken by the leaders to feel and be trusted. Otherwise, they're just words on the wall or in a presentation. Another thing Kris spoke about was her organization being life friendly. Post pandemic, this is more needed than ever as workers across the globe have recognized the integration of work and life. And in order to support the modern day workforce, this is an imperative. I wish more organizations would see things like this. The last thing I will leave you with is this quote from Kris: "Honor the past, live in the present, and build the future." This couldn't be more true as you consider the vibes now and later of your organization. Keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.